More than 55 million ballots have already been cast in early voting in the United States, with just 5 days left until the official voting day when ballots will begin to be tabulated. Now, presidential nominees, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump, are pitted in a tight race, both nationally but critically also in key battleground swing states that will determine the winner of the Electoral College and thereby the White House. Our U.S. Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease is covering developments for us and joins us now from New York. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. I must tell you, I was fascinated by that interview you had with elections forecaster, historian Alan Lichtman, using his 13 keys to the presidency model. So there's been so much polling on this election, both in terms of the national picture and in those key swing states. What's the broad takeaway at this point and the issues that are driving turnout just 5 days out of this election?
Just an additional anecdote there, Unati, in terms of the Alan Lichtman conversation, right? He has predicted the outcome of presidential elections since Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter back in the early 1980s and has been correct in his predictions ever since, barring the 2000 election between Al Gore and George W. Bush, which was decided, as you well know, by the United States Supreme Court as it pertained to the swing state of Florida. So his argument is, I actually got it right if the Supreme Court had gone in a different direction. So it was touch and go in terms of that, but he believes that his prediction and forecast is absolutely accurate, and he's sticking to his guns, despite, as you well point out, Unati, that the polls, both nationally and in the key battleground states, show a race that is neck and neck and will go down to the wire. Some polls show Kamala Harris nationally up a few points. Some show Donald Trump up a few points. Similar reflections in the various swing states, your Nevadas, your Arizonas, your Georgias, your North Carolinas, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. These are the states you hear the most about in terms of the 50 states that do decide a U.S. election. It's too close to call. And so the question really becomes, which side, which campaign is going to be able to drive their base to the polls? Which side is going to be able to ensure that their voters show up? Are their voters arriving because of reproductive rights? Are they showing up because they're unhappy about the economy? Are they concerned about inflation? If you're a part of the Muslim American majority in places like Dearborn, Michigan, are you showing up because you hate U.S. policy as it relates to the situation that is unfolding in Gaza? Is this about greater access to guns or less access to guns? There is a multitude of issues that will drive voters to the polls. And so this was spoken to by Darrell M. West, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. It's a political think tank, very, very much has its finger on the scale here. This is what he had to say about how this might play out.
One of the top issues in this election that favors Republicans is immigration policy. People are worried about the border. They think too many undocumented individuals are coming over that border, drawing on American resources, taking jobs, relying on social services. They don't like this, and this has been a big plus for former President Trump. On the Democratic side, abortion and reproductive rights in general has been a great issue for Democrats. The majority of Americans are on the side of Kamala Harris on that particular issue. Many women are concerned about being able to control their own healthcare decisions. So we have a situation where immigration and reproductive rights are very important issues to voters, but they cut in very different ways, with one issue favoring Republicans and the other issue favoring Democrats.
Unati, some additional terminology you're going to hear in the days ahead. Ground game. Which campaigns have the better ground game in terms of ensuring that voters show up to the polls? It's about knocking on doors. It's about making telephone calls. It's about ensuring that your neighbors show up, the broken telephone kind of thing in terms of getting people to the polls. Whoever has the better ground game, given just how tight the polls reflect things are, is probably going to win this election.
I want to talk about your background, Sherwin. I see you have an Electoral College map behind you. Just explain how the formula works and why the swing states become so critical in this context.
So if you win the national vote in the U.S. election, you don't necessarily win the White House. So Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016. Donald Trump won the Electoral College and then the White House. Al Gore won the popular vote in 2000. George Bush became the president. Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012 won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. So it's this opaque system that really gives a lot of power to the states. That's why we talk in this, in these late stages of this, months-long campaign about the swing states. And this is where the two candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, are spending the majority of their time. So essentially, the Electoral College is made up of 538 electors, essentially reflecting the number of representatives in the House of Representatives and the Senate, plus the 3 Electoral College votes that are given to the District of Columbia, which is where the U.S. Capitol is based. So essentially, if you are favored to win states like New York, which are traditionally Democratic states, or states like Texas, which are traditionally Republican states, you get only so far in terms of the 270 Electoral College votes required to win the election. So Kamala Harris is assured probably of winning a state like New York or a state like California. Donald Trump is favored in Texas and Alabama. And those states only give them so much in terms of the 270 threshold they receive. That's why those swing states that I mentioned earlier, your Wisconsins, your Michigans, your Pennsylvanias, are absolutely critical to both sides in terms of getting them to that 270 threshold and therefore winning the majority of electors in terms of the 538 that are present in the Electoral College. So that's the math that faces both campaigns yet. They are assured of states that will go for them, but they are also not assured of those swing states that sometimes go blue and sometimes go red. And that's where the emphasis is going to be, and that's where you're going to find the 270. And so the concern is that on election night, we might not get a result if, as the polls reflect, these numbers are going to be very, very tight, and so they're going to be turning over ballots very, very carefully to ensure that we get to the correct outcome here.
I want to borrow that word math, and I want to see what these numbers then are revealing. So, I mean, while the polling numbers show an extremely tight contest, the betting markets see a clear advantage for Trump heading into the closing days of this race. So let's talk about those numbers and what they tell us.
Yeah, there's some betting platforms that are also part of the conversation here in the United States, and they do not foreshadow exactly what's going to happen, because this is not a quantitative or a qualitative research in terms of betting markets, but essentially a betting platform called Polymarket puts Trump's chances of winning the White House at around 67% as opposed to Kamala Harris at around 33%. There's another platform called Kalshi, Kalshi, which puts Trump's prospect at around 62% and Harris at around 38%. But as I point out, these are not quantitative or qualitative polls. This is about emotion. This is about prediction. This is, brokers in the betting markets, putting their wagering and putting their money where they believe the candidate might outperform. And on Polymarket, if you were to put your money on Trump, you would be making $1 on every 67 cents wagered. And if you are betting on Harris, you would receive about $1 for every 33 cents wagered. But these bets are on political futures contracts. And by purchasing a contract, one then drives the price up. Or put another way, Unati, the perceived probability of it happening. And what we're seeing from the likes of Elon Musk, one of Donald Trump's top surrogates, Donald Trump himself, they are putting these numbers out on social media so that it feeds into the broader narrative that if they were to lose, they will then say, but look, even the betting markets were on our side. But as I point out, these are not quantitative polls. These are not predictive polls. This is about emotion. This is a feeling people have about who will win. And that's certainly what is now being reflected in the betting markets. But it is not going to determine who actually wins the White House.
Sherwin, before we wrap up, I want to touch this point. So if this election is as close as the polls tell us, we might not get results quickly on election night. And I wonder then how that speaks to concerns around violence, given the rhetoric around election fraud emanating, of course, from the Trump campaign and lessons we've learned after that last election in 2020 that he has, to this day, refused to concede.
January 6, 2021, very much top of mind, given the rhetoric emanating from the Trump campaign in particular. Donald Trump has not gone on the record to say that he would accept the outcome of this election. And it's worth noting that Donald Trump, to this day, has not accepted and conceded that he lost the 2020 election, despite over 60 court cases that were thrown out because there's a lack of evidence based on the claims that the Trump campaign has been making. And so he's casting aspersions around the integrity of the 2024 election, but there is no evidence to validate and to affirm that perspective. And so there is some concern around violence. In fact, a new report out this week from a group called the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism says that they are once again seeing the same warning signals and signs of political violence based on election denialism combined with violent language across various fringe platforms. They talk about platforms like Telegram, Gab, Communities.win, and something called Fediverse, signaling a potential for political violence following what they saw back in 2021. We've also seen action from governors, in particular the governor of Nevada. Nevada is one of the swing states, and he has already positioned the National Guard to be on standby out of vigilance and preparedness, right? Not knowing how things might go if this is in fact a very tight race. And sometimes, you know, the rhetoric emanating from campaigns is not necessarily based on the facts on the ground. Trump has already cast aspersions about this, and if he were to lose in a tight race, one expects him to do the same. And the concern around that is how that might rile up his supporters based on what we saw on January 6, 2021.
Sherwin, great analysis, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for that. Of course, Sherwin Bryce-Pease keeping us up to speed with what is happening ahead of those elections. Of course, 5 days to go on the 5th of November. Of course, all eyes watching the US for that.